Welcome everyone, and thank you, Mario, and the team for this opportunity, for the chair, of course, opportunity, and the opportunity to give these lectures. This will be my third and final one. I wanted to focus on a very specific issue in my last lecture, looking at space distribution, particularly in urban areas, and the relationship or potential relationship that can have with issues of inequality in transport. Whilst doing the literature search, there was some interesting disagreements, which I thought were also would also make the discussion very interesting. But we also did, in fact, do some research on the ground with space distribution in a variety of places. So I hope it's preliminary research, but I hope it sort of stimulates some interesting ideas in your heads and maybe possibly further work in this field. So this is some of the, I'll first go through some of the background literature, just to give you a flavor of the amount of what has been going on so far. With regards to urban space, the issue of urban space has been contested, always is, and generates strong public debates and resistance. This is something which we probably all experienced. I show you here two pictures. The upper one is in Valletta, the main city, which is a main street in which I was involved in its pedestrianization. There's a whole, of course, I could relate the story of this and take up the whole session just focusing on that and the politics and the issues there and the resistance to that. And the bottom photo is another photo of another high street, and you see cyclists following the depiction of the Madonna and the baby on a truck. So again, a nice visual of sort of the use of the street. The transport infrastructure, so the street, represents the most contested of public spaces. And this goes from roads to parking to pavements, walkways, and cycleways. But most of the time, streets are also symbolic spaces and social and physical spaces. And I think these two pictures here represent that very well from our local context. Now, with regards to distribution, the work of Stefan Gosling and his team look at the issue of distribution of road space also as a matter of equity or injustice, a matter sort of fairness, even though, of course, we know that this has also been disputed, and we will see later what Nello Deacon has said in this respect. Many advocates, of course, have used this to make claims about unfair distribution and inequality, and some, as you can see here as an example, built frameworks about space allocation and sustainable development as a way of sort of providing further support to anyone wishing to push forward the concept. Nello Deacon, in his 2019 paper, lists the works that have over time considered the street as an important space for equity. So he goes from Gosling et al. in BIVEC, but also to earlier works for the Right to the City by Lefebvre and Mitchell, Right to the City, the works on politics of mobility by Tim Cresswell and of course Schelle, and eventually the work of defining a just street by Hartmann and Preter. A just street here is defined as a shared public and social space which accommodates a variety of users. The allocation, however, in itself is intermingled with a lot of issues: privatization, commercialization, and securitization. And many examples of conflict exists between the perceived need of car traffic for shops. This is the same street that I was showing before with the cyclists. A proposal for pedestrianization almost 20 years ago caused uproar from the shop owners who thought that if people do not pass with their car in front of their shops, they will not shop, they will not buy. But then here below, you see the mayor, the current mayor, this is taken from April, so last month, mayor floats idea to pedestrianize Hamrun's main road and puts in a nice picture about how it would all look in front of the church if it was pedestrianized. And so we know, and I can assure you that the amount of comments received, I think the newspaper had to stop the blogging in the website. So these conflicts and ensuing public debates are part of the difficulties that city managers and politicians face when trying to implement, say, active travel infrastructure, for example, as the example here. Now, of course, we know that through the work of Ari, but also others, that the change in urban space distribution was also was happening in parallel with the growth in the car industry and the impact on public transport infrastructures, which were eventually removed, and road infrastructure, which was extended to accommodate urban sprawl, particularly in the US. But similar trends were also observed in Europe and subsequently in Asia, particularly with the rapid motorization and the stronger focus on more roads for cars. But urban space distribution is also a context-driven concern. And so Nello Deacon in his paper points at Amsterdam as an example to look at space distribution issues given the spatial or the special context of high cycling modal share. And so whilst Gosling and Agentur for Clevere Städte cover Freiburg and Berlin, the case studies there were focusing or measuring fairness on the basis of just space distribution and modal split, which of course is contested by Nello Deacon as not a particularly good way of measuring fairness in that respect. So measuring space distribution is in itself a contentious issue. Road engineering principles fueled by the need to remove bottlenecks and congestion, and to a certain extent cost-benefit analysis, they still dominate the design of space allocation in streets. And as you can see from the posters on the right, these are the tools used by politicians to justify motorized traffic over other forms. This is an interesting project here on the right because this is a project which is funded under the TEN-T, the European Union TEN-T network, which basically eliminated, as it says here, a traffic junction, a complex traffic junction, which used to cause a lot of congestion for traffic to access north and south. So this lies on the main axis of the island, and for since 2004, I would think, since the first infrastructure needs assessment for the European Union that was carried out in the islands after joining the EU, it was identified as a problem. You can see here the solution. The solution was a multi-level junction, very sterile, of course, and culturally non-adjusted, I would think, to the whole island landscape. But there it is. Now we have 7 flyovers in this junction, 12 kilometers of new lanes. And the way that the politicians have sold this is that, you know, you get to reduce 79% of your travel time. I've debated this. I'm not sure about the methodology, and I'm not sure actually that it saves 79% of travel time. But the other side of the coin was that they said, with this project, you're going to save 12 minutes a year of travel time. So I think after the the flack they got about the 12 minutes, they decided that this was a better way of selling the project to the people. But it's a quest for speed, right? So what we have is, you know, we eliminate bottlenecks, we reduce your travel time. But then when you see the infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians trying to cross this road, because as you can see, it's very close. On the bottom picture, you can see how close it is to the built-up area. It's not up to scratch. So the space distribution issue, I think, here becomes particularly important. So we go on to the study that we're still working on it, in actual fact, with colleagues of mine from Bogotá, Luis Guzman, and from London with Daniel Oviedo, to try and look at the comparative study on urban space. And we took 3 cities with very, very different geographies of development. We look at Bogotá, we look at Pieta from Malta, and Freetown in Sierra Leone. They're all high-density urban areas, of course, and we use high-resolution satellite images and the application of GIS to derive the necessary measurements in each city. So we build on what Gosling et al. Did in Fiverr, and on its conclusion, really, where they said that we need to assess space distribution in structurally different cities. And so we thought, you know, if we take three cities from 3 different continents, might be an interesting case study. So just to give you some context, these are the islands of Malta with 3 main islands and then some rocks around, but these are the 3 main islands. We look at, and you can see sort of the urban area in gray, which I think in total covers some 33% of the island. And then you see the urban area, and you can see the area we selected for the mapping. We looked at Bogotá in Colombia and the traditional city center for the mapping as well. And then in Sierra Leone, we looked at Freetown, and we selected the area close to the port as an example, as the case study at least. So I mentioned earlier that there are 3 structurally different cities. They are indeed. So you see the population and population density. Now, of course, for Malta, it is a very interesting perspective, because Malta is one of the most densely populated states in the world. However, when it is compared to other cities, it is not. So again, context here is very, very important when you see sort of these graphs of countries. Well, Malta is a city-state, so the comparison must be made with other cities, really, if it wants to really be considered contextually correct. Differences in rates of motorization. You see how car-dependent Malta is, with 80% car use, much less in Freetown and also in Bogotá. And with regards to accident injuries, we include the accident injury data because I think the research in the Gosling paper looks at the road accident injuries and the distribution of those injuries, which sees a high number of drivers and passengers in Malta. But then it changes in Freetown, 60% are passengers, and in Bogotá, 60% are motorcyclists. In all 3 of them, there's a consistent percentage of pedestrians or vulnerable road users that are injured. So I focus a bit on the methodology because I think this is important, and it has important effects on the results. So the research applied the methodology, as I said, in the Gosling paper. We used publicly available satellite imagery where available and other remote sense data. You will see in the case of Freetown. And we mapped the space distribution in each of the areas. We use standard GIS tools, and due to the limitations in time and resources, a few on-site visits were carried out to validate the data. And it is therefore important to acknowledge this as an estimation based on the best possible quality data available for the 3 cities. The mapping of very different urban areas across continents and cultures do produce, unfortunately, a number of challenges. The first one was the definition. So whilst typically one expects to find roads, pedestrian areas, public transport, bicycle lanes, or public parking, this was not the case in the 3 cities. So a local definition was established, which might indeed impact on the comparison between the 3 areas and the different rules that are applied for space distribution. There is also a level of subjectivity in the interpretation of remote imagery, which can only be eliminated through a common definition and the validation on site. So the lack of conformity here also might influence the outcome and possible interpretation. We could not avoid the cultural differences between the 3 cities. It is evident that practices in design, allocation, and subsequent use of space varies across place. Just to give you an example, pavements and sidewalks. So pavements and sidewalks are something completely different in different contexts. While some cities, there is a provision of pavements, which is a requirement. This was not the case in African cities, where off the main road space is shared by all road users, with very little dedicated infrastructure specifically for pedestrians. And in Malta, pedestrian space is sacrificed in the narrow residential roads to allow for car parking. So it changes completely the understanding of this issue of space. Then, of course, are the challenges of definition from space, because the quality of the image varies. So it was quite good in Malta, even though, of course, we had issues with maintenance of infrastructure. So you'd expect to be able to recognize pedestrian crossings from the white lines. But if they're not well maintained, the picture might not show them. We have shadow in very narrow roads from the traditional roads, which are very narrow. But in that case, we use Google Street View. So there was some validation with Google Street View in terms of compensation. But then in Sierra Leone, we were not so lucky with the quality of the remote imagery. The large number of informal settlements poses challenges for analysis, with a large number of alleyways and unsurfaced corridors, which are mostly used by pedestrians, but are not accounted for in any official inventory of infrastructure. And so we completed the mapping. This is Pieta in Malta. You can see that the area the location is very close to the city. It has a population distribution which is homogeneous. The area is sort of on the low income side, but it has an access to a marina and extensive sort of recreational infrastructure, which is associated with the marina, but the back roads, of course, are mostly residential. And here we have a 2 square kilometer area with a population of 5,000 people. And you can see the detail in the mapping, which was quite detailed, considering we could use Google Street View in this case. Bogotá, again, similar area, but higher population, again, low income, and the area houses also government institutions and has a number of public spaces, parks, and in total they occupy over 12% of the area. In Bogotá, we could also find some information about the amount of trips, so the modal split in the area, which was not available in the other city. And then Freetown, which is 5% of the total land area. Freetown is allocated to roads. but only 24% are paved, and there's a lack of sidewalks. And if there is, they are usually occupied by parked vehicles or traders. Here, we used remote sensed imagery commissioned by the local authority for planning purposes rather than Google, because the quality was not that good. The area is a bit bigger with mixed land uses and close to the commercial port. Freetown, like Malta, does not have cycling infrastructure, and the pedestrians are pedestrian areas measured in the field, because we did actually carry out some field work in Freetown, are very narrow or non-existent. And so the comparative of the percentage distribution shows here a dominance of road. Public parking in Bogotá is not allowed, so we could not measure how much area is actually dedicated to public parking on street. I mean, pedestrian area is highest in Bogotá, but lowest in Freetown. Again, considering how much, of course, this is not mapped. The public transport infrastructure, the lowest being in Malta. We do not have a lot of dedicated infrastructure for buses. No cycle lanes, except for Bogotá, of course, with the ciclovia. They did a fantastic job there to boost cycling. Mixed use, we clustered the mixed use in Freetown, which would refer to all the unsurfaced roads. And in Bogotá, there is the medium strip in the main roads, which takes up quite a considerable space. This is the central reservation, which is not found in the other cities. So, to conclude, the system of automobility is evidently still alive and kicking. The overwhelming dominance of the car is evident across the sites. This is despite the evident differences in geography, socioeconomic and cultural contexts. Similarities across the sites bear witness to the long-term consequences of the application of a similar paradigm of transport and infrastructure planning centered around the car. And in the absence of resources and capacity for investment and development of infrastructure, the pedestrian and cyclists are the road users that tend to be overlooked in the provision of space. But if you look at Bogotá, of course, they've taken a very strong policy stance with regards to cycling, which is helping redress some of these inequalities. Thank you.
Many thanks, Maria. Very, very nice presentation. Also very nicely illustrated. I see many heads crossing my screen. There is about 10 minutes for Q&A. Is there any of the respondents who would like to ask a question to Maria? Looking at the number, maybe just simply unmute and ask your question. Who has a question? If not at this time, I will start with the first question, Maria. You speak about inequalities. Do you have any yardstick when there would not be inequalities? What is unequal? Is it, well, should they all have the same number of space? Or should it be relative to the number of kilometers or the time spent or whatever? So I was looking for a yardstick about what is unequal.
So this is the interesting unanswered question yet. So the work of Gosling tends to compare it to modal split. So he's saying that, you know, you have a fair share of people in cars, and therefore they have to have the biggest share. But then Nello Deakin in his paper argues that it's also space, you know, sort of like, okay, cars take much more space and therefore they require more space. And so the debate is still ongoing in the literature, at least. I think from my perspective, when I started thinking about urban space distribution, of course, there needs to be the space relevant or relative to the type of mode, which of course then comes into question the issue of cycling, which Nello Deacon also talks about with regards to Amsterdam. So it's not a question that the car takes more space and therefore requires more space. Because in Amsterdam, there are a lot of bicycles which do not require a lot of space, but there are many of them. So you'd need also that kind of space. For me, I think the discussion needs to focus more on the distribution and accessibility that motorized vehicles is having on walking and cycling. So it's not about the amount, I think it's more about the quality. So if we see sort of one step to the next level of the research would be to look at connectivity of this infrastructure. So can you as a pedestrian access A to B just like a car driver could or a cyclist could in theory? So there are a lot of issues which remain unanswered with respect to what urban space and inequality are. It really opens a Pandora's box with regards to the issue and others, I think.
I definitely agree, and I also like your accessibility approach. I've seen some of the papers that you probably refer to who argue that you should indeed allocate according to model split, but then suppose there would be no infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians, 100% would drive by car. So should they get 100%? So I mean, it should probably the model split that would result if you would equally distribute, and not the current model split. Yeah, it seems to me. Do you agree?
Yeah, there are all sorts of issues which stem from planning, from visions, because of course, if we take the current vision of the islands, for example, with 80% car drivers, that means that no politician will be ever convinced to build a pavement or a sidewalk. So you need to have a vision where you want to go based on equality, and then reflect it in the provision of infrastructure as a matter of policy and priority. And of course, these are infrastructures, so they take a lot of time to change and a lot of money. So it's not a matter of deciding and implementing. It's a strategy that needs to be put in place.
Yes. Who else would like to ask a question to Maria? I see a hand raised by Mario.
Thank you, Maria, for your nice presentation. You're always focusing a lot on the interaction with politicians. Your methodology that you presented here, do you think it's an efficient way of intervening with politicians to raise this issue of inequality across different transport modes?
It's interesting. I did present some of this to politicians. I'm not sure they were particularly, I didn't see their face going, no. So I'm not sure that they actually had, the shock of their life when they saw it. I still think that we need better arguments than just space distribution. And because for them, it would be easier to hide behind, but there are so many cars, what do we do with them? And so many people that are driving, so what do you do with them? So I think we need to develop, and accessibility is one of them, we need to develop further measures which reflect on the issues of equity, and then use those and support them with, yes, the nice maps, because the maps do in fact create a nice image of how unfair the distribution is. And one of my earlier maps showed a bus station and how some of the bus stops were completely inaccessible because there was no pavement that attached to some of them. So I think it's more how we frame it. I think we need to frame it better, let's put it this way, and use better arguments than just modal split. Yeah.
I see also a hand raised by Anand. Anand, please unmute. Oh, you're already on mute. Please ask your question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think some of my queries were already answered, but a little small question about Bogotá. You mentioned about the large median in the middle of the road. Was it just a median or was it about BRT?
No, the BRT was calculated separately, and this is a median in the middle, which is kept It's only in the main roads, but the main roads, of course, take up quite a large chunk. So the median takes up quite a large amount of space, but it's empty. It's not the one used for BRT. The BRT is counted separately as public transport infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay. Because I have heard, I mean, it was from mouth to mouth, but they were preparing for some future-ready streets, and that's why they kept this large median in the middle of road so that they can expand BRT in future.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a good idea. That's forward planning. It's called, better than we do, for sure.
That's just that I heard from someone.
It changes. Yeah. It changes the percentages. Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anan. We have come to the end of this opening session.